Welcome to All Things Social Security. My name is Stephanie Joy of Joy Disability. I am a Social Security disability attorney, and I would like to invite you to watch our daily video tips on the Social Security disability and SSI claims process each day at the new time of noon Eastern Standard Time here on YouTube on this channel. And on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have our live Q&A live stream. So you are welcome to join that as well. Ask your questions, get there on time, and you'll be one of the first answered. Thanks so much and have a great day. Enjoy the video. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. It is evening here. Okay. Had a question regarding this a veteran with 100% TDIU who just got his or her, I'm going to say his second denial when now seeking Social Security disability benefits. And my standard and accurate, however, frustrating response about VA disability in general. When people say, hey, if I'm 100% PNT, how can I not be found disabled, with the SSA? The VA found me disabled. And they're really hard, blah, blah, because they're two totally different definitions. One is far more stringent. PNT, you can be able to work out in the general labor force there with jobs that do exist in substantial numbers in the economy, whereas with SSD, you're not able to do that. You have to prove that you're not able to do that. Your impairments need to medically, record-wise, prove that you cannot do that. In this case, it's TDIU, and that's where they are unemployable as per the VA. And I'm not a VA expert, but just that little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So anyway, I'll give you just what little bit of knowledge I might be able to surmise here. So the question was, if you're TDIU, if you are, I think he's saying, he says, where are you supposed to work? Seems to be a conflicting interest because you make over 15K in most situations. That kind of is irrelevant because that's not actually true. Anybody can go out and make 5,000 a year if they want. So that's not so. But the question about, I wanted to redirect the question to why would 100% TDIU not then prevail with Social Security disability? And here's my take. Okay, so take it for what it is. I do think with proper workup, I bet you most TDIU could have a decent case, particularly if you're over 50. You know how tough they are with the under 50s. But let's hop to it. I reminded the questioner that the VA adjudicator had to find that he met a different definition than the SSA definition or the SSD definition. And they likely have different rules of evidence to do that with. I don't know that that last part has much influence because I don't know that the differing rules of evidence are necessarily pivotal or of magnitude, but I would just mention it because they probably have their own way of defining evidence, acceptable evidence, etc. Theirs might be more lenient. Maybe they find acceptable medical evidence from a chiropractor, whereas that's not the same with SSD, but I don't know. But just pointing it out. And so the adjudicator at the VA found that the person was unemployable based on what they had in that definition they had to meet. They weren't meeting the definition of SSD. They just weren't. I also wondered, and you guys can tell me who have done it, when you do a VA disability claim, PNT or TDIU or whatever, do they interview you? Does the decision maker speak to you, ask you, to fill out like the equivalent of a function report? Do they do all those things? Because if they did meet you face to face, that cannot be translated on paper. The SSD people would not have that. That extra credibility thrown in there by seeing the person and saying, wow, really, yeah, I could see that this person is really as bad off as he's claiming, which is why we have hearings where you can have a video hearing or an in-person if you insist. Not my clients, but generally claimants in general can insist on an in-person. I pointed out also that TDIU does not mean you can't work, even though it says unemployable. It only means that you can't work in a manner that is substantial, kind of like SSD, and their numbers are similar. They have it where you can't work over the poverty line, basically. And SSD with SGA being $16.20 a month is not far from the mark. And I pointed out there are tons of jobs under, contrary to what he had said about all jobs are over 15,000. No, that's all full-time jobs. But there are plenty under 16,000. Even in places where minimum wage is really low, you're probably working full-time would be making under that amount. Okay, and I also pointed out gigger jobs. I mean, I have many clients who, during the case, and of course after, continue to work part-time as a gigger, like a Lyft driver, Uber, DoorDash, to bring in some extra cash. They don't come near SGA, not even really TWP most of the time. It's very part-time. It's when they're feeling up to it, because those are the kind of jobs you can click the button on to pick up a fare, right? Anytime you do or do not want to. You're having a bad day, you don't have to go in. It's all up to you. Okay, so I continued on. Let's just see. To point out also that if let's say you got TDIU 2 years ago, all that evidence is 2+ years old. There's zero evidence from that. And that decision was made on that talks about your condition today. And as you might recall, with Social Security, you have to prove you're disabled now. You can prove you're disabled a little bit in the past, that's fine, but you still have to prove it continued to the present. And that you do not have from the VA decision. So you cannot prevail on that alone if that case was 2 years ago. If it was yesterday, maybe, but not a year ago, 2 years ago. A lot of times it's even more than that. So you have to just keep that in mind. That's why it's very important that you continue to aggressively pursue, very proactively, like if it's your main priority in life, to pursue treatment, which will produce records, which will help develop your evidence for your SSD case. And let me just see if I had another explanatory point I wanted to share with him. I did mention that, the SSA medical people, medical expert that reviews your case to get you your RFC at step 3 of the sequential evaluation process, that those doctor may disagree with the findings of the medical doctors that evaluated you. Now, I know that's a little offensive. You're like, yeah, but they saw me in person. I get it. I agree. But, there can be you can have a evaluating doctor that saw you that just takes everything a person says, and even though he finds nothing really wrong physically, which some things don't show up physically. We were just talking about that in a fibromyalgia video we just did about a new court ruling on fibromyalgia. So, one doctor's understanding of the medical condition of someone, and let's say they're both just looking at the records, right? Might not be the same as the other ones. That's not to say that the one that is more stringent is wrong or right. It's just that they're doctors with different opinions. The whole world is made up of that. Every piece of litigation where there are doctors involved, personal injury, insurance defense, medical malpractice, there's always two doctors disagreeing. Also, if the medical doctors that evaluated you did not test you, I say test you, but it's more, I guess it is kind of a test in terms of seeing how much you can walk, sit, or stand, then, there is no evidence in there as to how much you can walk, sit, or stand that the SSD could rely on, and therefore must come to the same conclusion. So the SSD people have to come to that conclusion themselves based on the current evidence, which your TDIU is not, or your PMT. So again, those medical records or evaluation forms or, reports of condition, if they evaluated your medical records, they could just differ. They could be based on, they can't say how long you can stand or walk because they never even posed the question to themselves. So there is no response like that. And the same would be true if they never inquired and discussed how long you can maintain a schedule, if this is a mental health impairment, or adapt to routine changes, or one of the many other required mental tasks that one must be able to do to perform pretty much all jobs, skilled and unskilled, in the economy. So if the VA documents don't touch on that, then the SSD has to come to its own conclusion based on whatever treating medical doctor reports you have now, therapists, and possibly their own consultative examination. Okay, moving on, since I typed this out for him. Yeah, so what's not in evidence in the VA records is therefore not in evidence when those records get moved over to the SSD, because you presumably are going to send them, right? And that would include current stuff, as I alluded to above. Stuff from 2 years ago shows you had a problem, an impairment. And the SSD is probably not going to say you don't have an impairment, but it's not going to show what that is today. And it could also be more of substance, not time frame. There's no evidence about how far he can walk. There's no indication of a walking issue or a standing issue or anything more than mild, because they never got into it, because they were covering different definitions under VA. So I just concluded with him that for this reason, you need to address the SSD law when doing an SSD case and ensure that your evidence covers those needs, not just the different needs that they needed to cover in your VA case. And then, of course, I wished him really best of success in this case, and hopefully he will win on this third review, which is probably ALJ now, and my fingers are crossed for him. Okay. There you have it, guys. TDIU and why it's not always going to be a slam dunk with SSD either, just like P&T is not. All right. Have a good night, all. Bye-bye. Hello again. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was helpful, if not just a little bit informative. In the event you have a Social Security question you want addressed, please feel free to make a comment below and ask the question, even if nothing to do with this particular video. And just a quick, again, reminder, we have our daily video shares and tips around noon every day of the week. And on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have our live Q&A session where you can come in live and enter your questions in the chat. And we all pretty much have a good time for an hour or two. I look forward to seeing you there, hopefully. And lastly, don't forget about our benefactor memberships. They're very reasonably priced. The first one is very nominal, and you get a few perks, but on a bigger scale, it contributes to us being able to fulfill a mission of assisting certain people with representation that would otherwise not be able to get it. We look forward to continuing to do that, and so far it's working out like the bomb. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Bye-bye now.